I wonder what game I should play today. I know, I'll ask my good buddy Wario. Hey Wario, what do you think I should play? Wow, a real copy of Wario Land 3! Thanks, Wario. Wait a minute. This isn't my bit. This isn't even a real Wario. And this isn't even a real Wario Land 3! It's... Kirby Tilt and Tumble! Oh no! Alright, jokes aside, let's actually take a look at Wario Land 3, starting with that deep lore. Wario Land 3 actually has a fairly unique setup compared to its predecessors. While the other games all have a very simple premise of Wario goes on a treasure hunt because he likes money, Wario Land 3 sees Wario out on an expedition when he stumbles across a music box. Upon inspecting it, he's teleported inside of the music box where a hidden figure appears inside the temple where Wario wakes up and tells Wario about his new surroundings. The figure tells Wario that he will free him from the music box, but first Wario must find the 5 pieces of the music box to restore the hidden figure's power. To further incentivize Wario to help him, the hidden figure tells Wario that he will get to keep all of the treasure once he's free, so Wario sets off to find the 5 pieces of the music box and escape the bigger music box that all of this takes place in. The weird music box inside of a music box thing is a little confusing, but the way the game presents it through cutscenes and exposition makes a lot more sense. To really explain why I like this premise so much more than those of the previous games, I want to talk about Wario as a character a little bit. Wario was introduced in Wario Land 2 as a villain. In most of his other appearances outside of his own games, he's been portrayed as a villain, and that holds true to this day. The only exceptions have been in his own games, where he takes the role of a protagonist, but he's still portrayed as a bad person through his actions. Wario Land 1's plot had Wario attempting to steal a statue from Peach from a gang of pirates to bribe Peach into giving him money to buy his own castle. I'm not saying that Wario being a bad guy in his own games is inherently a bad thing, but getting it just right so that Wario doesn't lose his characterization while still making him a relatable character for the player is a bit of a tricky feat. Wario Land 3 nails this by having his own greed be the cause of his predicament, and now he has to atone for what he's done wrong to save himself. This makes it much easier to relate to Wario as a character in his own game, and I love this game's story for that reason. This is easily the best use of Wario as a character, as well as the most unique premise in the series so far. What's not as unique, however, are the aesthetics. Visually, Wario Land 3 feels almost like a carbon copy of Wario Land 2. Lots of the sprites and music are ripped straight from the previous game, and while it's not really a bad thing because Wario Land 2 has some pretty great visuals to begin with, it can be hard to distinguish which game is which just from looking at them, especially if you haven't played them before. For example, imagine if Virtual Boy Wario Land had the same sprites and everything, but was on a Game Boy instead of the Virtual Boy. You could still easily tell it apart from Wario Land 1 just from looking at it because of the sprites, locations, and enemies are all unique enough to distinguish them from one another. Wario Land 3 also borrows a lot of the music from Wario Land 2, and while there are some decent original songs like the intro theme, the credits theme, and a few boss themes and level themes, a lot of the music is ripped straight from the previous entry, which just adds to the repetitive feeling of the game, especially coming right off of playing Wario Land 2. Another interesting tidbit is the day-night cycle, which aside from changing the music and palette of the levels, has a few effects on the actual level design, but it's pretty minimal. Unfortunately, the game never makes it quite clear to you whether you need to be in a level during the day or night to pass a certain obstacle, so while it is a cool idea, it just feels undercooked. I do have to compliment the level themes, however, as each one of them is unique and distinguished from any other. There are 25 different levels, and every single one of them has its own unique theme. I could go listing them like I have in previous reviews, but I think the footage throughout this review will speak for itself. Unfortunately, this point is also slightly undermined by the structure of the game itself. I mentioned the repetitive nature of Wario Land 3, and it's not just attributed to the aesthetics. It's also the biggest flaw of Wario Land 3 as a game. The game is set up sort of like a Metroidvania, where you acquire new power-ups and make changes to the environment as you progress, allowing you to do more things when you revisit levels. That's right, Wario Land 3's gimmick is that there are 25 levels, each with 4 chests that, when collected, end the level and reward you with a power-up to Wario's moveset, which allows you to access new parts of old levels, or something to unlock new levels or new parts of old levels by slightly changing the layout of the levels themselves. This has both positives and negatives to it. On one hand, you'll be revisiting old levels, making easy work of puzzles and enemies that gave you trouble before because of your new power-ups, or you'll be exploring new parts of old levels, allowing the devs to get the most out of each level theme. But on the other hand, it means you'll be going through a lot of the same puzzles and set pieces over and over again. Take the Tower of Revival, for example. This level requires you to do this puzzle where you use Fire Wario to light up the 4 torches in a row to proceed to the rest of the level. This is a fine puzzle on its own, but why couldn't it be placed later in the level where I only have to do it once to get one chest instead of right at the beginning where I have to do it every time to get every chest, regardless of which chest I'm going for? This is just one of many examples of repetitive level design, but the repetition doesn't stop there. Similarly to the last game, Wario Land 3 doesn't have a health system or checkpoints or anything like that, so instead of death being the punishment for failing a challenge, you're often forced to just fall down and make your way back up to try again. This would be fine, as it's functionally the same thing as dying and trying the challenge again, but your punishment is either way too harsh, forcing you to backtrack too much while not offering a fair challenge, or it's way too slow, forcing you to sit through some tedious crap just to try again. Look at these bubbles, for example. These exist solely to waste the player's time. Your goal in these sections are to swim through an area without getting caught inside the bubbles to make your way down an underwater path, but the corridors you have to swim through are often too narrow, and the bubbles swerve back and forth too quickly for it to be easy to get through them. And when you get caught by the bubble, you have to sit there and wait for the bubble to bring you back up to the top before you are allowed to try it all over again. There's just so much waiting in this game. Waiting for something to bring you back to the start of a puzzle or platforming section every time you fail it. Waiting for different transformations to end. Waiting for the bosses to let you attack them. It's so slow that it can get really frustrating. But this is really only at the worst of times. While these examples are egregious and littered throughout the entire game, the puzzles and platforming sections themselves are often very challenging and fun when you're not forced to backtrack or wait for something every time you mess up. Wario Land 3 makes much better use of the transformations for puzzles than Wario Land 2 did, and while most of them are just the ones from Wario Land 2, there are a fair deal of new ones, such as Invisible Wario, which allows Wario to pass through these eye panels, and Vampire Wario, which allows Wario to turn into a bat and fly around so long as he doesn't touch any light. Unfortunately, these new transformations feel a little underdeveloped, since they're only used a handful of times, and the invisibility one doesn't even hide Wario from other enemies, which makes it seem almost useless outside of its one very specific and situational function. While the new transformations got the short end of the stick, the returning ones from Wario Land 2 are put to much better use than their original appearances. Zombie, Fire, and Spring Wario are all functionally the same, but see a lot more use, as well as Fat Wario, although it's still just as slow as before, unfortunately. There are clever uses of these transformations all throughout the game, like the torch puzzle I mentioned earlier. Like I said, it's a fine puzzle on its own, but the problem comes from the repetition of having to do the puzzle over and over every time you do the level. There are also puzzles where you have to use Fat Wario's jump that shakes the ground to push other enemies up onto higher ground, allowing you to use their transformations in a different area. This stuff is all well and good, but where it really shines is where you have to use multiple different transformations in tandem with each other to solve bigger puzzles. While these are pretty fun puzzles to solve, the bigger ones can be a little annoying, requiring you to go through the same obstacles multiple times to get different transformations through the same area. Another mechanic from Wario Land 2 that's put to much better use in this game is the roll move. While it's still limited to being activated on these slopes, its use for puzzles and platforming challenges is more fun and satisfying than anything in the previous game. There are plenty of instances where you have to use the roll move and time your jumps to make it through a short bit of terrain without bonking into a wall or falling down, and they're pretty fun. One really clever use of this is in Sea Turtle Rocks. In this section, you have to start the roll from the bottom and then get all the way to the top, but the room is too small to get across, so you have to go through these pipes to loop around back to the other side, time your jumps to get up to higher ground, loop back around again, and then roll through to get the key. Now you just have to do it again, but going the other way to get the chest and end the level. It's not perfect, seeing as it makes you do the same thing twice in a row with almost no difference but the direction you're facing, but it's still a clever puzzle that took a bit of thinking to figure out. Something I haven't mentioned before now is that in order to unlock the chest at the end of each section of a level, you need its matching colored key. There's a gray, red, green, and blue chest in each level, with their keys usually being close by. Most levels will have 4 paths diverging from the main area of the level, blocked off by something that forces you to use some ability that you don't get until later, or unlock a certain treasure in another level to remove the roadblock. But within each path of the level, it will usually split off into 2 different puzzle or platforming challenges, one leading you to the chest, and the other leading you to the key you need to unlock it. However, these paths aren't telegraphed at all, so you can end up spending a bunch of time trying to get through a really tough challenge, only to be met with the chest that you don't have the key for yet. Now you have to go backwards through the challenge you just conquered, go through the other path to get the key, go backwards through that path, and then do the first path all over again. This might happen to you, or it might not. It's really only a matter of which path you guess you should go through first. I think they could have had the key blocked by a short puzzle that's on the same path as the chest, so you'll see it on the way and say, oh, there's the key, I better grab this before I continue on here. There is one little thing I also want to mention here real quick, and that's this golf minigame. In certain levels, there will be a big gray block in your way that requires you to beat the golf minigame to progress. So you go find the minigame door, and you're greeted with one of many different randomly picked holes. You charge up your shot by timing button presses on the meter at the bottom, and Wario rams into the enemy to push it towards the hole, or just falls down if you time your shots poorly. It's a decent minigame, but not instructing the player on how it works at all was a really bad choice. I didn't realize you could hold right on the D-pad to look over until halfway through the game, and it took a good while to get used to the timing for certain shot strengths. There are also obstacles on some holes, like water or lava that give you an extra stroke, or sand and grass that affect the strength of your shot. If your amount of strokes goes over the par, you lose and have to try again, but instead of having one hole you try over and over for each level, it just picks another random hole. It's pretty repetitive and can be annoying, but it only pops up a few times throughout the game, and really isn't worth getting too upset over. Fortunately, it actually rewards skill instead of relying almost completely on luck, and has a much more tangible reward than the minigames from Wario Land 2. I also want to touch on the bosses, and for the most part, they're pretty decent. They're mostly kind of forgettable, except for two. The first is a returning character from Wario Land 2, and it's my favorite boss from that game, the basketball bunny. The smile on my face when I saw him jump out at me with a soccer net behind him was really something else. Unfortunately, the actual fight itself is so bad that any love I have for this boss is now gone. You're supposed to jump on him to turn him into a ball, just like in Wario Land 2, but now you need to bash him into the net instead of picking him up and throwing him into a hoop. The problem with this fight is the turtle goalie. He's almost impossible to aim your shot around, especially since he takes up so much of the net and because the controls in this fight are super finicky. You can jump on or bash the turtle goalie to make him go into his shell, but he only gives you about 2 seconds to stun the bunny and make a shot. And with how much he bounces around when you turn him into a ball, it's nearly impossible to line up a good shot in that amount of time. Your best bet in this fight is to keep him in the center of the screen, jump on him, and just bash him and hope for the best. This fight pretty much just boils down to luck because of how inconsistent the mechanics are. I appreciate the attempt at fan service here, but the actual execution of the boss fight is so bad that it ruins all the charm of a returning fan favorite boss. The other of the two memorable bosses is the final boss. To unlock the final boss, you have to collect the 5 pieces of the music box, put them together, and play its song. The last piece is only given to you after around 60 treasures of the 100 total treasures in the game, so I guess the remaining treasures are just optional bonus treasures for better endings. However, at this point, the game was getting pretty repetitive and I was just wanting to be done with it, so I headed for the final boss to finish the game. One other thing in regards to 100% completion that I want to mention are these big coins. There are 8 in each level, usually 2 on each of the 4 paths for the 4 treasures, but you only keep them if you get all 8 in each level, meaning that it's not even worth it to waste your time on them until near the end of the game. I would have been much more incentivized to collect them all if I could get them as I went along throughout the game, but they reset every time you re-enter the level, so I only ever bothered with it once just to see what it did. And all it did was fill in one tiny square on this map, and I said, nope, not worth it at all. While there is a lot of extra content to keep players invested if they're enjoying the game, I just wasn't personally into it enough to bother with the coins and extra treasures. At this point, it was a 9-hour game, over twice as long as Wario Land 2, and I was just ready for it to be over. So, when you take the 5 pieces of the music box to the temple, it plays its song and the figure is fully awakened. It was a big clown thing the whole time. Kind of weird, but I like the creativity. I can't say I've ever seen a game with a clown as the final boss. As it turns out, this thing was an evil spirit that came to the music box world seeking to control it. But, as it's revealed once you defeat him, the people of this world managed to seal him in 5 pieces of a music box and scatter them across the land. However, at the last second, he used the little bit of power he had left to turn everyone into the enemies you've been fighting throughout the whole game, just before he was sealed away in the temple. When Wario showed up in the music box world, the enemies thought you sought to awaken him and were just trying to stop you from freeing him, allowing him to take over the real world as well. But when he reveals his true form, Wario steps up to take him down, and for the first time in the series, we have a good final boss. The boss attacks you with his hands, swooping them down to punch at you and clapping them together to grab you. If he grabs you, you're taken to a game over screen, which I was surprised even exists in this game at all, but it just takes you to the title screen and you can go straight back into the game and just mash through cutscenes for a little bit until you're back into the fight. Fair punishment for not keeping your guard. To defeat him, you have to wait until he swoops his arm down to punch at you and ground pound his hand. It'll fall to the floor, allowing you to pick it up and throw it into his face. His attacks get speedier and trickier with each hit, and after the 3rd hit, he goes full rage mode, giving you everything he's got. One more hit and he goes down. It's a bit short, and once you know what you're doing, you can take him down in under a minute, but it's still a very satisfying final boss and acts as a great conclusion to the game. This is followed up by a credit sequence with some fantastic music despite being pretty short, and the game comes to an end. Wario Land 3 is decent. It's an improvement over Wario Land 2 for sure, and its satisfying puzzles are enough to make the game an overall enjoyable experience, but it's dragged down by the repetitive level design and a lot of waiting. It has plenty of boring or frustrating moments, and a handful of the puzzles can be a little obtuse, but I do believe the good outweighs the bad here. It's not as solid or fun as Virtual Boy Wario Land, but it offers a great premise for a game like this, beautiful and unique visuals, a soundtrack that, while most of it is taken directly from Wario Land 2, is still pretty solid all around, and a fun game that fans of puzzle platformers will get a kick out of. I can recommend this game, but I have to advise you proceed with a little caution here. This game is still pretty rough around the edges. So, that'll conclude the Wario Land 3 review, and also part 1 of the marathon. I'm actually going to be splitting this marathon up into 2 parts because it's actually been a little taxing on me, and I'm kinda sick of Wario at the moment. It's been fun, and I think we're through the worst of it, but I do want to move on to some other games for a little bit, and then dive back into the Wario Land marathon after a couple reviews. So I'll see you guys next time for